Right, Roman numeral 8, letter A. Who is God? This could be a semester of discussions and study and lectures. This could be a lifetime of study. We're going to do it in like 3 minutes, okay? In 5 minutes. Jewish conceptions of God. We know we relate to God as a creator from the early chapters of Genesis. We relate to God as a liberator from the early chapters of Exodus. And very significantly we relate to God as someone we can have a relationship with through means of being commanded. It's a very significant thing. In the early chapters of Genesis, humanity is created, placed in charge of the pinnacle of creation, and then in being commanded not to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, that elevates the status really dramatically, because now human beings, as commanded beings, have this very direct relationship with God. But we have normative obligations. We're held accountable for our actions to God, and God speaks to us and demands things of us. And that stance carries out throughout the Torah as well. We understand there's only one God. That means that God can't be divided into. Well, it means that everything that happens is all as one source, right? There are various ways of thinking about these matters, metaphysics in the ancient world and today, which were dualist. There was like a good God and evil God, and they were in battle one against the other. That's not what we believe. Actually, is it worth taking a few minutes to? Yeah, this is worth taking a few minutes to do. I want to show you something. Hold on a minute. God is not. Keep it closer now. Get there. So that we don't understand the universe as being the product of two warring forces, a good force and a bad force. Everything, good and bad, all has one source, and ultimately there's a greater unity that underlies is responsible for creation. We reject certainly the Christian notion of the Trinity, in which God is really divisible, and even more so the notion of the Christian notion of the incarnation, that God could become human or could become physical. God sits outside of the physical universe, as the creator of the physical universe, is the one who gives meaning to the physical universe, but is not physical directly. Which isn't to say that there aren't different ways in which God is manifest or appears to us, and that is something that in certain Jewish schools of Jewish thought they speak of God's attribute of mercy, God's attribute of judgment and justice, God's various attributes of God that we can experience or we perceive God in certain ways, which that's all really from our perspective of like our experience of God in different ways, as opposed to something about like the essence of God, which is not divisible. Maimonides felt that it was really, even that was too much. You couldn't use any word to describe God. Like any word that we use to describe anything in the universe is inadequate to describe. I mean, you say God is great, God is big, right? I don't know. You say watermelon is big. Okay, you could say a truck is a really big truck, but I use that word to describe, you could say your college professor is very wise. When you say God is wise, the way your college, let's say the same word to describe things that really are not at all comparable. So what we can say, and Maimonides taught and wrote, was only that God was not foolish, God was not ignorant, God was not weak. This is called negative theology, and Maimonides sort of thought that was an important way to understand God. Another important way that we can relate to God, have a relationship with God, even that, despite that infinity of greatness and beyond physicality of God, how can we have a relationship? So that's the question that philosophy ponders. How can mortal, finite, limited human beings have a connection to God, comprehend God? So philosophy is one way of it. I think Jewish mysticism is another approach to that, especially like the Kabbalistic system, which develops an entire systemization of all of those ways in which God is experienced, attribute of mercy, attribute of justice, and the more elaborate systems by which we can connect to God and experience God. Sort of different answers to the same question the philosophers are asking. And maybe most classically, we relate to God through being commanded beings, being subject to God's will, God's law. And by observing mitzvot and studying Torah, we are responding to God's call. It's a relationship that is created with God. We can connect to God's mind through Torah study, right, by studying God's word, and encountering God's will through Torah study, even prior to the actual implementation of mitzvot. So that's what I'm showing you. If you look at page 243. Hello. Welcome. I'm going to grab a siddur on your way in, one of the current siddurim. Great. So page 243 is the beginning of the Ma'ariv service, the evening service. The evening service for weekdays. It starts top of page 243, some verses from Psalms. We always say something, some verses. We have to say some verses. We can't just jump into prayer. We have to say something first. Then the bottom page 243, 242. That's Baruch Hu. That's the call for prayer. We stand. The prayer leader says Baruch Hu. We respond. And then page 245, we have two blessings that are prior to the recitation of the Shema, which begins in 247. The Shema is the mitzvah in the Torah to recite the Shema twice each day, in the morning and the evening. It has 3 paragraphs, all taken directly from the Torah. But this mitzvah, reciting the Shema, has blessings, has brachot that surround it. So the first blessing, let's look at the 245. Let's look at the place where it says, let's just start. Blessed are you, especially in 244. Blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who by his word brings on evenings. By his wisdom opens the gates of heaven, and understanding makes time change, and the seasons rotate. And by his will orders the stars and their constellations in the sky. So why are we saying this blessing now? Why is this an appropriate blessing for the first blessing before the Shema when we recite Ma'ariv? Why is this appropriate? Yes?
Because we've just phase changed into the evening.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the evening. Okay, it's a blessing for the evening. Then it goes on. I'm sorry, you know what? I really want to show you. I apologize. Well, we'll finish it. Okay. He makes the day pass and brings a night, distinguishing day from night. The Lord of hosts is his name. May the living forever enjoy God rule over us for all time. Bless you, Lord, who brings on evenings. Ma'ariv aravim brings on. So it's a blessing for time. I want to show the formulation. What would we say in the morning? So in the morning we also say the Shema, but we don't. It's not the evening. So what do we say in the morning? And the blessing for the Shema. Look at page. So it starts at page 89. That's the Baruch Hu in the morning, right? Leading into the sections that. Before the Shema. The Shema in the morning doesn't come up until we get to page 98, 99. So you have the blessings before, a little more elaborate in the morning. How it opens. Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you, Lord our God, on page 88 and 89. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who forms light and creates darkness, makes peace and creates awe. Okay? So what's this? It's sort of similar, right? But it focuses on not on the evening, but it focuses on the
morning.
The morning. But it says something else. If you look at the little citations, it's Isaiah 45. See that? On the side of the margin there, on page 88, 89. Isaiah 45 at the bottom. Who forms light and creates darkness, makes peace and creates all. Do you see that? Isaiah 45. Anyone happen to have Isaiah 45 memorized? Yeah? Okay. I'll tell you what it says. I'll look it up. I don't have it memorized either, but because it's a quote from Isaiah, but it actually changes it in an important way that I think is significant. I think you'll see where we're going with this, okay? Isaiah 45. Yotzer v'rei choshech, oseh shalom v'rei ra. I form light and create darkness. I make peace and create woe, evil. Okay? Shalom, ra. Well-being and non-well-being. So, okay? From light, Yotzer v'rei choshech, oseh shalom v'rei. In the Siddur, it's et hakol, creates everything. In the actual verse in Isaiah, it's peace and also evil. So that's alluded to in the formulation. It's toned down a little bit in the formulation of the blessing, but the allusion is to a verse in Isaiah where it's clearly stated that the source of everything is God. Good and bad. Things that we experience as good and we experience as bad are both from God. So this is a rejection of dualism. Right? When this blessing was added, we're going to surround the Shema with blessings before and after. It was formulated in such a way to negate dualism, right? Evening and morning, right? The sun's coming in. We're blessing God for the evening, for getting dark at night. Okay, that's because we're not dualists. Okay. The next, but if you flip back to 245, just because it's shorter in this version. The blessing that we say next is a blessing for Torah. It's a blessing for the Torah, but we relate to it. We frame it with love. With everlasting love, have you loved your people, the house of Israel? You have taught us Torah and commandments, decrees and laws of justice. Therefore, Lord our God, when we lie down and we rise up, we will speak of your decrees, rejoicing in the words of your Torah and your commandments forever. For they are our life and length of days, and then will we meditate day and night. May we never take away your love from us. Blessed are you, Lord, who loves his people Israel. So blessing of God's love for the Jewish people. And how does that love manifest? What's the sign of that love? Not a rhetorical question. Torah. And the law. Mitzvot and the law is the manifestation of God's love. This is a, perhaps, direct polemical response to Pauline Christianity, which creates a theme in which there's the law and love are in opposition to one another. And that was the big idea that launched Christianity, to leave aside the law, that the law chains you down and constricts you, and that when the chains are lifted, you can bask in God's love. You don't need the law anymore. And this blessing is saying, no, actually, we experience God's love through being committed, through the chains, through the bound, through the normative moral order that the law creates, through being in relationship with God by being commanded by God and being accountable to God. Okay. Then we say the Shema, 3 paragraphs, which also express very important themes in Jewish theology. The first paragraph of the Shema speaks of that love for God has to be the ultimate value, that we at times are willing to give our lives for the love of God, even sometimes. The second paragraph speaks of reward and punishment, that there is a moral order to the universe, and it isn't always manifest in this world, but ultimately there will be judgment and there will be justice. That justice is something that is sort of necessary to creation. Again, even when it's not apparent, even when it doesn't take place when people are alive. And the third paragraph speaks about the need to remember the exodus from Egypt, that God is not just an abstract set of ideas, but God intervened in history, took us out of Egypt, and in that way formed a special relationship with the Jewish people as the one who redeemed us from Egypt, one who freed us from slavery, to give us a special role in history as the bearers of the Torah. That's the third paragraph of the Shema. The blessing after the Shema.
So where's justice? What did you describe?
The second paragraph of the Shema, reward and punishment is what I think, right? The second paragraph.
Shacharit?
The second paragraph of the Shema. The Shema itself. May I have Shema, right? It's the reward and punishment. The blessing after the Shema in the evening, the next one is Ga'al Yisrael. It's a blessing of Geula, of redemption, which is it's an argument against nihilism, right? That history has a happy ending, ultimately. No matter how challenging things are, no matter how distressing things may seem, we believe that there will be redemption, that history will have a happy ending. And so it's possible to see these 3 blessings as making sort of 3 polemical arguments, three stances. We frame the recitation of the Shema as sort of like making statements about how we see the world, how we understand God. We reject dualism, which was, Zoroastrianism was like a major religion in the ancient, and they still exist, but they're more minor now, but they were a major religion in the ancient world. The Jews lived among Zoroastrians for centuries. We reject the Christian idea that love and law are in opposition, and then we also reject the kind of nihilist cynicism that, life is a endless tragedy and a cycle of, tragic cycle. There's no escape from that. No, like actually, there is a direction to history moving towards a happy ending, and ultimately, that's the third. That's the blessing after the Shema. So, there's a few things about God. What is the Torah? I'm not going to talk about what is the Torah now, because what is the Torah is actually, that's Roman numeral 1, so we'll get to that next. Roles of Jews and non-Jews. So God created all human beings. All human beings are of equal sanctity, equal specialness in God's eyes, I'll put it that way. And clearly God created the universe and created humanity because all human beings have some role to fulfill. And I think ultimately are fundamentally created equal, with an equal tselem Elohim, with equal divine image. The divine image that with which humanity was created is in every human being. It seems that what happened is that if you look at the first few chapters of Genesis, you find God getting repeatedly disappointed by people. Adam and Eve sin in the garden. Cain kills his brother Abel. 10 generations later, the world has to be destroyed, and only Noah is saved. Then Noah comes out of the ark and gets drunk, right, and curses his son. Then the children, they're supposed to scatter across the earth, and instead they all gather in one place and build a tower. So time after time, generation after generation, humanity seems to get corrupted and loses its way, and God's purpose in creating humanity seems to be frustrated again and again and again. So after the Tower of Babel, we're like really separated and spread out across the earth, and in this way, if there's some corruption or something bad happens in any one place, it won't spread to all humanity anymore because there are too many of us and we're too diverse, and some of us have some good ideas and some of us have some bad ideas, but we're not gonna, we won't all be bad together as it happened in prior generations. And then God selected Abraham and Sarah and their children and their grandchildren and said, I want to be like a catalyst. I'm going to give you the Torah, so you'll get like a head start for the purpose of being a role model for the rest of humanity. Because I want humanity to be diverse and to be in different nations and tribes and cultures and languages. But you want to be like a demonstration model of what it looks like when a nation establishes a community where people care for each other based on justice and ethical monotheism, and that's something that other people ultimately can learn from. So that's people, the prophets sometimes spoke about Israel as a light unto the nation. I think that's what that means, right? It's like I don't know what a model, given enough time, everyone else would have maybe come to the right conclusions anyway and learned how to live right. But God gave us a head start, gave us the Torah, with the goal that people would learn from us and would, not become Jewish, but learn that just as we take care of our community and have a society that's ethical and just and caring, so too should they, in their own languages and cultures and civilizations, but to see us as an example in that way. So the Jewish vision for the end of days, every nation has its own identity, and everyone is different, but they all kind of see that our system of ethical monotheism is a way of life that enhances all sorts of good things and is a good way to live. In the meantime, we need to preserve our distinction while also respecting all humanity, and that's the balance that we're all citizens. Let's say the United States, we're supposed to be good citizens and good neighbors to people of every faith and race and creed, and we're supposed to partner with all humanity in the task that God gave to Adam and God gave to Noah of filling the earth and taking care of the earth, and sort of mastering the universe, technology, science. We're supposed to join together with all human beings in that task, but also preserving our sacred mission as Jews to study the Torah and observe the Torah and pass on that Torah to the next generation so that we can be of some use to humanity. Like our way of life represents something different and unique and special, and therefore we have to safeguard it. And that means being a little bit separate from others. That means only choosing other Jews as marriage partners. It means only eating, kosher foods, which some of the laws of kosher food, as we've seen or will see, have a specific purpose of keeping us a little bit apart from others, so that we can preserve our own identity as we're living amongst, a vast, vast majority of people who aren't like us. Yes?
Why didn't Jews recruit like other religions?
We didn't recruit others. So historically, it seems that maybe once upon a time Jews did a lot of proselytizing, and we stopped when that became, like basically the church, forbade it, and it wasn't allowed to happen anymore. So that's one reason that historians will say that there are certain periods in Jewish history when there was a great deal of proselytization. I've heard one estimate that maybe 10% of the Roman Empire was Jewish.
Okay.
Right. So that's a staggering number of Jews. There were even more people who were not Jewish, but were they called themselves God-fearers. They were they liked Judaism, they were interested in Judaism, they studied Judaism, they had Jewish friends, and they didn't actually become Jewish. It seems they really didn't want, circumcision was a real barrier to people converting back then. And most of those God-fearers eventually became Christians. And also then there was, as Christians took power, they made it illegal to become Jewish. If you look at a lot of Jewish books, halachic books, they're often printed with disclaimers. They'll say things like, every time there's a reference in this book to, the persecution of the government, it's not referring to the Tsar whom we love and who treats us with, and every time it refers to conversion to Judaism in this book of Jewish law, it's only referencing countries where that's legal, not here, And so there's a lot of Jewish, this was how Jewish books were printed for hundreds of years. But fundamentally, there's no reason for someone to convert to, there's no need for someone to convert to Judaism to fulfill his or her mission in life. God wants every human being to be in a relationship with God, to be a good person, to make the world a better place. You don't have to be Jewish to do that. The Jewish people has a specific way of doing that through the Torah, and other people don't need the Torah or have other ways of doing that. So that's why we're not active in proselytizing. But, somebody who wants to join, it's like, can join our family. There's a midrash, a legend, that when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, he first offered it to the other nations. And according to the midrash, each nation had some complaint. They said, what's in the Torah? There's a lot of ancient stereotypes, they sort of put in this midrash. I'll leave out the stereotypes, So one nation says, well, the Torah says you can't steal. Oh, we like stealing, we don't want the Torah. And it says in the Torah you can't do this. Oh, we love doing that. We don't want the Torah. And then when it came to the Jewish people, we said, as it says in the Torah, Na'aseh v'nishma. We'll do whatever it says, and before we even hear what's in the Torah, and so God gave us the Torah. That's a midrash. So even that midrash, maybe there were minority voices. Maybe when they said, "Oh, we like to steal, we don't want the Torah," maybe there were 10% of that group said, "Actually, that sounds like a good idea." So maybe that minority was like, "No, we really want." Maybe those souls who were in the minority, according to this ahistorical midrash, maybe those are the souls of people who eventually, over the course of history, convert to Judaism. There's another, Talmud says in one place that one of the reasons why we were scattered and exiled all across the earth is to find converts in all places where we live. So that's a very pro-conversion stance, but not in a proselytizing way, because there's no isn't necessarily an advantage, right? Somebody who is living a good life, being nice, not killing anyone, not hurting anyone, not stealing, following the law, being kind, to animals and people, something like that. That person is doing what God wants that person to do. If they become Jewish, then they have to be really careful about observing Shabbat carefully, keeping kosher carefully, It's like a lot of there's some risk inherent, implicated in taking on those obligations. So we don't want to put that risk, that burden on somebody who, unless we're really confident that they'll be to their advantage. Letter D, moving on. Reward and punishment in this world and the next. Seems from the Torah that there's reward in this world. The Torah says if you, in the second paragraph of the Shema, if you listen to God, there'll be rain, there'll be blessing and all this. So, and it seems in the Torah that things work that way, but it doesn't seem that things work that way now. So maybe in the Torah, which is a book of prophecy, it's a book about, right? So everything happens for a cause that's in the Torah. But in our world, outside of the Torah, it doesn't seem to be the place. And the rabbis in the Talmud said, there is no reward and punishment in this world. Reward and punishment is reserved for the world to come. And so, why do the wicked prosper? Why do the righteous suffer? Because there is no schar v'onesh b'hayam. Like there is no justice in this world. Justice has to come in the world to come, in the next life, afterlife. So there's some other realm where justice happens. In this world, justice only exists to the extent that we create it. Interestingly, I think in classic sources, old sources, the prospering of the wicked was a major philosophical challenge. I think now the suffering of the righteous is more of a challenge. That's an interesting shift. It's all the same problem. The problem is there is no justice in the world. There's no reward and punishment for anything in this world, in this life. But it seems like one half of that problem used to bother people a lot, and now the other half bothers people more. And I think you can sort of muse about why that may be. Moving on. E. Okay?
Just
Yeah, good.
Reward and punishment.
Sure. Each of these topics could be a semester, okay? Each of these topics could be a lifetime to try to understand, okay? We're doing them really, really fast because we have no choice, okay? But truth is, there's a lot of extra reading if these types of philosophical questions or existential interest you. There's like the best books that have ever been written, right, are all about these topics, so we can happy to make recommendations. But yes.
This is not a profound question, it's a profoundly lazy question. You were saying that reward and punishment, like we do believe that the cheshbon is only in the next life, or that it's here?
No, next, meaning it doesn't seem to exist. Meaning the observed reality is that there is no reward and punishment in this world, right? It doesn't seem to be. It's demonstrably true that there is no just, right?
But that's not theological.
That is theological. Why? I mean, yeah. Well, it's also it's
right,
also.
That it's proper.
Yeah, so in the Torah, so it could be that maybe you could say at one point in the history of God's relationship to the world, there was a more direct correspondence of blessing and reward, etc. It's also true that if it rains, because the Jewish people do mitzvot, that means that reward and punishment is collective, not individual. And maybe it's somebody, like you're the scoundrel whose field is next door to the right. Like it's going to rain for you just as much as it rains. Or it's raining because everyone's doing good, and they're like it's going to rain on your field too. This sort of right. And vice versa, right? You can be very righteous, but if like the generation is sinning and there's a drought, like that's going to be bad for you as well. So by necessity, this collective reward and punishment means that they're going to be individuals who are going to get the short end or the long end of the straw. So tight. And also it could be that God has withdrawn a little bit from this kind of direct, miraculous intervention in the affairs of the world over the centuries. Or it could be that the Torah is describing a kind of theoretical model rather than describing, right? It wouldn't get, the Torah doesn't, like everything that happens doesn't make it into the Torah. If it makes it into the Torah, it's because there must be a cause for every sin, there must be a consequence of every action. Because it's a story about that. And so in the Torah, things work that way as like a book. You know, that's like the rules of the book, but that's not necessarily the rules of that happen outside of the Torah. So you can say, it's like somebody suffers in the Torah, you can say, what does this person do to deserve that suffering? That's a fair question to ask about a character in the Torah. That's not a fair question to ask about another person. It's a very cruel question to ask another person. We don't ask why this happened, we ask, what can we do in response? How can we help? How can we learn from this? How can we make ourselves better? Not why. So the wrote about this in an essay called, in Hebrew, called The Voice of My Beloved Knocks. It's also been published in English as a title, Fate and Destiny. And you compare Fate and Destiny. Fate is somebody who asks why. Like, things happen to me, why? That's a person who's a victim of fate. Somebody who takes control of her own destiny asks, what? How? Okay, what does this mean for me? What meaning can I glean from this to respond better in the future? To improve myself or have a better, more effective response.
So that's your twist about the second paragraph of the Shema, where you mentioned just 50 minutes ago.
Yes,
justice is kind of a theoretical bent to it.
Yes, which by necessity means after some other time, right? After life or in some end of days scenario, but not necessarily here and now.
Or could it be actually just kind of maybe a more wholesome perspective of the person that is experiencing it? So whatever perspective you have right now is maybe lacking still. We can talk about this afterwards.
Yeah, there's a story. There's a story. I'm trying to remember the line. Jonathan Sachs has this great one of his books. He has this line where somebody is in response to some tragic course of events. He says, I have questions on God's governance of the world that are so profound that I could storm the heavens and demand answers. But I'd rather be down here with my questions than up there with the answers, right? That's our job is to ask the questions, to demand justice, to hold God accountable to that, expectation of justice, and to do our part to build justice and create justice. But that's our job is not to, the answers are not for us necessarily. Like, that's not our job. Individual and community. Also really important. Judaism it's not a spiritual path for an individual. I mean, it is also a spiritual path for an individual to achieve enlightenment and self-improvement, but the Torah was not given to individuals. The Torah was given to the Jewish people. We're meant to observe the Torah collectively. And many, many mitzvot can only be fulfilled by the community. They're communal mitzvot. For example, the Torah has to be read 3 times a week. It's not an individual obligation to hear the Torah. It's a communal obligation to gather with a minyan and read the Torah in public. There's an obligation, the Jewish people are told to set up a system of courts and promote the general welfare and ensure justice. That's not an individual obligation. That's something we do together. And really, all the mitzvot, observing the holidays. We can't do that individually. We have to decide collectively when do the holidays occur, and whether we just take control of our calendar. So the Torah was given to the Jewish people to collectively observe mitzvot together. It doesn't mean that there isn't also a way. The Torah's mitzvot and Judaism isn't also a way for an individual to achieve enlightenment and self-improvement and spiritual fulfillment, all those great things. But it's really, really important that we're doing this. We're engaged in this. Primarily, we're engaged in this endeavor, this Torah endeavor, as a collective, because we try to make decisions with some degree of consensus and move on together. And it also means it's really, really important to be part of a community. Those of you who've been, in the conversion process, there are guidelines and there are standards and there are red lines. My most firm red line is you have to be living in this neighborhood, because part of the process is joining the community. Not everyone has to like this community, that's fine. But if you don't like this community, this is not a place where you can't convert to Judaism with me here, because the whole part and parcel of the process is integrating into the community and taking part in that collective communal life, caring for one another, being cared for by one another as a community.
So there are individual obligations,
Correct.
implied individual obligation to participate in the community.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a complex. Yes, right. There is an individual obligation to participate in the community, to support the community, and then there are also individual obligations that you fulfill yourself, like to keep Shabbat, even if you're on a desert island. But there are also communal obligations that can only be fulfilled by some collective, body. F. Roles of men and women. This would also be a small topic. So there's 613 mitzvot in the Torah. Most of them are not in any way gendered, but they apply equally to men and to women. There are maybe a dozen mitzvot that around a dozen mitzvot that are gendered, that only men do them, or some only women do, and those mitzvot happen to be important, very prominent in our communal lives. A lot of them surround issues of public prayer, and so they sort of loom front and center. I think it's important to realize most mitzvot, men and women, relate to command men and women equally, and there's a fundamental equality to men and women from the earliest chapters of Genesis that I think are ought to permeate all of Jewish thought on gender. That being said, given that there's, so the question, what do you do then with these mitzvot where there are differences? So one possibility is you could say, well, let's build a philosophy out of these differences. There are 12 mitzvot where there's a gender difference, so let's use these 12 mitzvot to construct a model of, what men do, what women do, writ large. And we're going to build it from these mitzvot. We could also say, let's not do that. Let's just say these mitzvot each one has its own unique dynamic and its own unique set of issues, and we won't build a general philosophy based on those narrow, specific mitzvot. We'll say our general philosophy is men and women are both created by God equally. They're meant to be partners, as is described in the first chapter of Genesis, and there are a dozen mitzvot where there are gender differences, and we'll obey them and figure that out and navigate that. Well, that's one thing to say. Second thing I want to say, the Torah was given with the intention that it would be for all time. So it's forever relevant and forever binding, but it also had to make sense to the people who received it. Okay? The reason why the Torah was not given in English is because when the Jewish people gathered around Mount Sinai, none of them spoke English. Okay? Right? The reason why the Torah was given in Hebrew is because that's the language that they spoke. So, therefore, in order, the Torah had to accommodate some of the social structures and even religious, theological assumptions of the people who received the Torah, so that it would be makes sensical and acceptable to them. For example, the Torah has animal sacrifices. God doesn't eat animal sacrifices. God doesn't eat doesn't smell the whatever, right? Like what the Greeks imagined. God doesn't need animal sacrifices, but every religion worth its salt had animal sacrifices. So the Torah put in animal sacrifices, and so do your animal sacrifices. That's what every religion has. That's what every religion does. You won't take it seriously as a religion if it doesn't have animal sacrifices, but you're going to do it in a monotheistic way in the context of a philosophy that the Torah endorses and supports. The Torah also has a mitzvah of what do you do if you go out to war and you capture enemy woman in battle, and how can you take her back, and you have to give her some time to mourn before you can marry her, and it's a whole, it's a terrible, talking about kidnapping as captive woman, it's a terrible thing the Torah describes. And Jewish tradition understands it's a terrible thing, but what is it doing there in the Torah? It's called harm mitigation. Lo divratra ela k'neged yetzer hara. The Torah sometimes accommodates people's evil inclinations, understands what ancient warfare included, and says if you're going to do this, make sure you protect your rights in these three ways. So sometimes the mitzvah that's about harm mitigation. So it's all to say that there may be a patriarchal kind of structure or implications of certain mitzvot of the Torah or the system of the Torah that I don't believe reflects what God wants, the way God wants us to live our lives, or doesn't reflect anything ultimate and existential about men and about women, but it was necessary for harm mitigation. Okay, if you're going to have a patriarchal society like every other society, let's make sure that women's interests are protected in these 20 ways. And we're going to take that patriarchy that every other society had, and we're going to give it a monotheistic spin and recognize that all human beings, men and women, are created in the image of God. And I think that task, was even taken to a next degree by the rabbis in the Talmudic period, who basically added new protections for women in marriage, especially, like the institution of the ketubah, as developed over the rabbinic period, gives women more leverage in marriage, protects women when marriage is dissolved, and that process has been ongoing in the Middle Ages. Polygamy was outlawed, even though it exists, and it's clearly not ideal in the Torah, but it's there in the Torah, and it was outlawed in the Middle Ages. It wasn't necessary anymore. We can do without this. Always in the direction of enhancing the status of women, protecting women's interests. Yes?
It's a little interesting because it kind of contradicts the whole reason that Jews are supposed to kind of be a, civilization that they're supposed to follow. So how do they have these, everyone was doing it, so we'll do it better?
Yeah, so in other words,
concept.
I think it's like about a gradual elevation, right? If the Torah had not had animal sacrifices, we would have walked away and said, this is not real. What kind of religion doesn't have animal sacrifices? So instead, we do animal sacrifices in a way that's monotheistic, that enhances our devotion to God and enhances our connection to mitzvot, and in that way we learn. So it's still better than everything else that existed, and hopefully it continues to improve and continues to stay one step ahead. The problem, I think sometimes we perceive it to be maybe lagging behind. I think that's sometimes maybe a price we pay for maintaining tradition, right? If you change too much too quickly, the whole system collapses. This is a comparison someone made it, to, when was the rabbi said, orthodoxy is like orthodontia, if you put a little bit of pressure over a long period of time, you can straighten move your teeth. If you apply a lot of pressure at once, you'll just break the teeth, right? So that's what it means to have a tradition that's been around for thousands of years. A little bit of pressure in the direction of enhanced dignity for every human being over generations, and the tradition evolves and transforms itself as we better understand God's will. But if you apply a lot of pressure at once, based on some outside ideology that we need to make the Torah conform to right now, then the system breaks down. I think that's from my analysis is that there are communities which made many rapid changes with transparent motivations of ideologies, and I think tradition broke down in some of those communities in a way that to me seems harmful, and they don't necessarily have enough energy to keep that going. So a little bit slower, I think is more sustainable.
So a cynic could argue actually that here there's some modern reinterpretations of the Torah itself. That here we're living in the
So I don't think I'd be a cynic. I think just that could be a mystic, because I think or a postmodern. You can't. Once the Torah comes down from heaven, it's interpreted by human beings. Human beings aren't perfect. Human beings make mistakes, and human beings also have families and professions and cultures and worldviews. And you can't separate out from yourself. There's no Archimedean position. You can't, step outside everything, your identity, and then go back and the person interpreting the Torah is the same person who has a body and a gender and a family and a culture and a worldview and all sorts of things that influence us and things that we influence. So if we're faithful to the Torah and we are committed to it, then the meaning of the Torah will be shaped by necessity as each human being takes hold of the Torah, interprets it, and to the best of our ability tries to observe it with integrity and authenticity. But that means different things will bother us, different things will be challenging, that will be pushed to kind of respond and interpret, and interpretations that, obviously it makes sense, and this is what this passage means. Now, so obviously that's not what it means something else. And that could be a way for a mystic. That's how God is continually wants us to, that process of these ideas sweeping through history is a process that God is part of. Rabbi Cook wrote about this in some ways. It's somewhat based on Hegel also, right? That there are sort of ideas that sweep through history, and as ideas sweep through history, we Jews, as we're swept along, the Torah is expanded as well through that process. Now, sometimes that means we stand, we confront and we reject ideas that are very popular because they're really antithetical to the Torah. So it's not, the point is not to anything you hear, well, that must be great, and the Torah can comment that. No, some things you have to confront vigorously. But just pretend that it's impossible. I don't think it's real to pretend that I'm like a brain in a jar, like interpreting the Torah. We interpret the Torah as full people.
Do you have a hint of this in the Torah itself? This interpretation. I think that there is really some passage where the Chachamim, the sages,
in the Torah itself, yes. In the Torah itself, I think the book of Deuteronomy, which was 40 years later after the Exodus, it's a different religious perspective than the book of Exodus. Over 40 years in the desert, practicing Judaism with Moses' guidance, the people were different. 10 plagues are not described in the book of Deuteronomy. We're just reading about that on the Torah this week, right? Pretty dramatic thing. They're not mentioned, not one. Not one of the 10 plagues is described by name or by description in the book of Deuteronomy, even though the book of Deuteronomy describes the entire story of the Exodus. It does not mention the 10 plagues. That's a big deal. So it seems there's a religious worldview that is enhanced by the 10 plagues, and there's a religious consciousness which is not enhanced by telling the story of the 10 plagues. And we were one type of people in Exodus, we were a different type of people in Deuteronomy, 40 years later. So that's religious growth and religious maturation. I think you can also look at the differences between the way the Korban Pesach is described in Exodus, the way the Korban Pesach is described in Deuteronomy. Different ritual, different meanings for people who've learned through Moses' leadership over 40 years to see things differently.
And Moshe himself.
Moshe
He just
himself.
sum around,
Moshe
and then
himself.
he
He's
gives
very
us
eloquent, yes.
eloquent speeches.
Okay. Letter G, evolution and creationism. Yeah, we don't get so hung up on that. Like, if you look at the first of all, there's no tradition in Judaism of reading the Bible literally. We never read the Bible literally. We read the Bible through tradition. We interpret, we explain. There are no Jewish fundamentals, no Jewish biblical fundamentalists. We don't read the Bible literally. Rashi, in one of his earliest comments on the first one or two, I don't know, one of his first comments in the Torah, he says, you can't understand these verses at all in the plain sense meaning. They make no sense. The first verses of creation, there is no way to understand them on a plain sense level. This is not instruction manual for how to create a universe. It's telling us something else. So I don't see, the Torah is not a book of science, not a book of history, it's a book about values, it's a book about our relationship to God. That's the message of the first chapters of Genesis, not a play-by-play historical account. But, we believe that there's a purpose to creation. In that sense, we're, maybe different from what a sort of atheistic scientific worldview would present, because we believe that there's a purpose to creation, there's a hierarchy to creation, that humanity is the pinnacle of creation, but that's not, I believe that's quite consistent with, sort of modern scientific theories of evolution, etc. Finally, Mashiach, the Messiah, David, when he became king, was promised that the kingship would be his. In fact, when Jacob blesses Judah, he says, once the scepter will be in your hands, and so the kingship will be in Judah's hands. And so the idea is that this is the family that will reign as king. Minimally, that came to be understood that at some point in the future there will be a Jewish king who will be a descendant of David, and he'll rule once again. And that will be Mashiach, and that is this event prophesied, of which the prophets wrote about and spoke about. That might just be it. There's a position in the Talmud that the times of Mashiach will be no different from the times we live in today, except that sovereignty will be returned to the Jewish people. And there are others who, over time, this person of Mashiach and this Messianic age took on much more grandiose understandings, and it became understood to be a transformed world in which quite literally, the lion and the lamb will sit down together, as opposed to metaphorically, the lion and the lamb will sit down together. I'd say we'll find out. Unlike the Christian idea of a Messiah, Mashiach in Judaism is not a savior, is not a godly figure, it's just a human being who was born normally, will live and will die, like everyone else. That's very different from the Christian notion, and unlike the Christian notion, Mashiach will be successful in his lifetime and accomplishing his tasks, which minimally include, restoring sovereignty to the Jewish people and gathering exiles, and maybe even beyond that, transforming the world. There are two major messianic passages, one in Isaiah, there's one in Jeremiah. In Isaiah, it seems Mashiach comes first, and then once the figure of Mashiach is identified, he will lead this religious transformation of the Jewish people and our repentance and our return to Israel. In Jeremiah, it seems the return to Israel comes first. And the person, the individual Mashiach, is at the end of the process in Jeremiah, as opposed to the beginning of the process as described in Isaiah. So maybe there are two different paradigms, maybe there are two different theories, maybe there are two different ways in which things could occur, but I think it should not be lost on us that the kind of modern return to Zion, and began 200 years ago, was from the ground up, instigated by the Jewish people in drips and drops, and then in their masses returning to the land of Israel without any Mashiach figure, but perhaps as part of this process of the ingathering of exiles, which is certainly core to any Jewish understanding of what the end of days will be about and what the Messianic process is about. Yes?
Would certainly be a man.
Oh, good question. Insofar as he's going to be king, that's interesting. The Midrash says that only men can be king. There were a few Jewish queens, one or two. It seems that everyone was okay with that, maybe because they weren't like full queens. They were like they were queens with based on some type of a vote or something. They were sort of, so they didn't have quite that same authority as a king. So only insofar as he has those kingly responsibilities, it seems like it's going to be a man. But that's a good question. And I'd say, that being said, I kind of be like, I don't know, we'll find out. It's it doesn't matter too much. And this is also this will close. There's when evaluating a religion, there's what the religion believes, what it teaches, but it's also how important that particular belief is. I think questions of afterlife, end of days, messianic era, figure of Mashiach, I think these questions are much less important in Judaism than like doing mitzvot in the here and now. I think that goes back to the Talmud. I think that's like, the most meaningful thing we can do is to do mitzvot, right? Once we're dead, we can't do mitzvot anymore. So, for all the souls that are basking in God's presence in paradise and how happy they are, but we get to do mitzvot, and they can't. So, in that vein, you know, like we'll figure out what happens. We'll figure out what happens when we get there. And in the meantime, we have a lot of mitzvot to do. We have Torah to study, ways to fill the world with meaning, ways to be of service to our fellow human beings, and that can occupy a lot more of our attention than sort of speculation on things that we can't impact anyway, and we'll find out, you know, when the time comes in any event. We'll pause here. Oh yeah.
Isn't there also like a underlying like war that breaks out in that story, or is that something I just learned?
There are in the prophets there's a description of a war against two great empires that was associated with one of the messianic kind of visions in the prophets. Correct, but you know, it's called Gog and Magog. There's two nations. One's called, so somebody said Gog stands for Gzela Uganeva, which means theft and robbery, and Magog stands for more Ganeva Gzela, like even more. So so maybe it's all about rampant consumerism and you know, unchecked late capitalism, maybe, you know, who knows? But or it's about, you know, the Napoleonic War. You know, every time there's a big war, people say, "Oh, this is the war of Gog and Magog." So there's also a very interesting history of messianic speculation. Actually, a lot of messianic movements in Jewish history, a lot of messianic figures emerged. Needless to say, none of them were successful, but that is an interesting history. Actually, of, like throughout the centuries, there have been figures who
bring a lot of thought, or yeah.
Yeah, the most famous was Shabtai Tzvi, who in the 1600s, you know, convinced a substantial percentage of Jews in the world that he was the Messiah. People sold their possessions to get ready to go to Israel. It really swept the Mediterranean and into Europe. And he went to meet with the Sultan to negotiate the granting of Eretz Israel to the Jews. And the Sultan threatened to kill him if he didn't become a Muslim, which he did. And that was actually wasn't the end. There are people who felt even after he became Muslim, they continued to, in secret, believe in Shabtai Tzvi that he was the Messiah. This was an underground movement that lasted for centuries within Jewish circle, Jewish community. Like they felt, for all I know, they're still around. It's secret evidence. They claimed that he had to. Everything had been done to prepare the world for redemption, but he had to like go down. He had to become a Muslim to like kind of really like enter into the depths of like, you know, like leave Judaism behind and seek out, you know, the last remaining sparks that could be elevated to. And there was a Jacob Frank in Central Europe who went even further. So we have to intentionally sin in order to elevate the sparks. So they would have orgies. They would eat tray food in the 1700s.
Wow.
And the followers of Jacob Frank in order to bring Mashiach. They were kind of
Interesting.
wild times. That was a little digression. Jewish history is more fun than you think, okay? We will pause here. When we next meet, we'll start the class again from Roman numeral 1. So we may wait a little bit for
Just a question.
Yes?
Were there any commentaries that were thinking about Mashiach, kind of your own inner self? Kind of, you have worked so hard on you, so that you really have to be.
That's a dispute amongst scholars of Chassidut. There's some who say the Hasidic movement was a neutralization of the messianic ideal in Judaism, because it took Kabbalistic mysticism, which was very redemption-oriented, and transformed it into entirely something about the person, the individual. And that's a dispute amongst scholars of Chassidut. Is it or is it not a neutralization of the messianic zeal in Judaism?
And in Chassidut, is there a particular current that was more like that than others?
Maybe. I'm not current on that. There's a literature exists in this question. It's in English. Which Michelle has something to say about it. All the others have something to say about it. It's okay. Let's. I think I kind of want to wait a little bit because I want to pause because I want to see if we can get some new. Just we're starting from the beginning, so it'd be a good time to start. So I think we want to work, and also traveling. So we wait till the 13th of February. Okay, 7 o'clock. Still okay?
Yep.
13.
That'd be the
Same time?
same time, yeah.
Is it a Tuesday?
It's a Tuesday. All right, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon. Before February 13th, see you in Shul.